My name is Paul Speirs and this is my Global Music Industries presentation. I certify that all the materials in this assignment, which is not my own, is duly acknowledged. I have read and understood the section in the programme handbook dealing with plagiarism. So in this presentation I will be discussing the origins of reggae and argue that it changed the social, political and cultural landscape of the UK. Beginning with where reggae began, I will explain how it not only changed the political landscape in the UK, but also in Jamaica. I will then move on to the 1970s, where reggae became global off the back of a certain musical figure, and then discuss the ska revival, where reggae brought together a generation of white and black through music. So the abstract of my presentation is: Jamaica is the creator of ska, mento, reggae and dancehall and has laid the groundwork for the world to emulate its music. According to the IFPI's 2016 Global Report, recorded music revenues increased by more than 5.9% to gross US dollars, that is, 16.5 billion in 2016. However, it is uncertain how much Jamaica has made from this statistic. We know Jamaica has been responsible for some of the best music in the world, but there have been few studies of the music industry from an economic standpoint, despite Jamaica's export of music. So the methodology for my presentation is using qualitative research methods, which refers to the data that provides insights and understanding about a particular subject. The subject I'm bringing up, of course, is an analysis of the global export, which is reggae. Another reason I'll be using this research method is because of the way I'll be collecting data. Although it is mainly through research of a book that has been wrote on the politics of music, specifically in Rock Against Racism, Two Tone and Red Wedge. Obviously, I wasn't born until after the 70s, of which is the main decade I'll be looking at. I'll have to rely on newspapers, reviews of performances and scholarly research of my subject. So the summary of my presentation is to understand the globalisation of reggae. I started my paper with the origins of the genre, starting with its original form ska, progressing to rocksteady, then evolving into reggae. However, the point of this paper is to understand how reggae impacted the UK. I've summarised the key points of this in the presentation. So to start, I'll talk about Windrush, where reggae was kind of introduced to the UK. It began in 1948, where the ship MV Empire Windrush arrived at the Tilbury docks in Essex, bringing workers from Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago. Those who arrived in Britain between 1940 and 1971 from the Caribbean countries have been labelled as the Windrush era, hence the term. In total, the ship 492 passengers, many of whom were children, and the children would then go on to bring about a ska revival, as I will be talking about later in the presentation. But first I've asked myself, what are the origins of reggae? To understand the foundation of which reggae was built, I decided to research the origins of what came before reggae. In the book Bob Marley, Roots, Reggae and Revolution by Brian Richardson, there is a chapter on the subject. Starting in Jamaica, where there were several performers and producers such as Coxsone Dodd, Duke Reid, the guitarist Ernest Ranglin and pianist Theo Beckford, have stated to claim a responsibility for inventing ska, which is an early form of reggae. Here is the song Easy Snapping by Theo Beckford, which was However, since there are so many claiming to create the genre, it has become unclear as to who did. What can be disputed is that the emergence of ska was the stepping off point which began the transition from Jamaican musicians who were originally imitating jazz and R&B, then instead developed an indigenous sound that would eventually evolve into rocksteady. Rocksteady literally allowed partygoers to rocksteady rather than dance themselves into a sweat. It allowed space for artists to experiment with bass lines, drumming patterns. This then allowed the progression for it to turn into reggae. Charles Bradley, who was an American soul singer, states that if ska was the birth of modern Jamaican popular music and rocksteady its fairly truculent adolescence, reggae was its coming of age. Here is the Body Snatchers. Let's do rocksteady.
People get ready, got to rock steady. People get ready, got to rock steady.
But why did reggae become so popular? Its message of openness, its rebellious quality, its firm affirmation of Rastafari, and was a central preoccupation with social and political issues. Another reason why it became so popular was because during the 1970s, children of Jamaican immigrants who came to the UK from the Windrush were often called Black British, and they positioned themselves through reggae as a cultural form not only of identity but of protest. Music has always been political, and when reggae was at its height, it impacted the politics in Jamaica. A famous example of this was when 12 days before the elections were due to be held, an attempt was made on Bob Marley's life. It was on the 3rd of December 1976, and coincidentally 2 days before, Smile Jamaica, a free concert organised by the Jamaican Prime Minister at the time, Michael Manley, in an attempt to ease tension between the two opposing political groups. I'll now talk about a big part of why Jamaica is vital to the world. Although no one can deny Jamaica's musical heritage, it is not invested in its infrastructure unlike the UK or the United States market. The entertainment minister in Jamaica said that the estimated GDP estimate for Jamaica was $14.6 billion, of which the creative industries represented approximately 5%, or it would equate to $730 million, and that music represented close to 2% of that total. Another key point that I'm raising in my paper is the ska revival. The reason I'm talking about the revival is because it brought a political movement which united black and white people. As mentioned in the Rock Against Racism section in my paper, National Front increased in popularity, and Rock Against Racism was a movement to combat the rise of racism. In the book Walls Crumbling Down by Daniel Rachel, Neil Spencer, the editor of the NME at the time, said that the two-tone movement stood for a new generation of black Britons, one whose identity was first and foremost British and second West Indian. But what was two-tone? It was a record label by an art student called Jerry Dammers in 1970 who founded the label, but was also part of a band called the Specials. The label was initially a vanity label for the band, the Specials. However, over a time the label grew and became responsible for some of the biggest ska acts of the time, including Madness, The Beat, General Public and the Fine Young Cannibals. The other side of this fight were the National Front, who during the 1970s made political advances by capitalising on anti-immigrant sentiment, partly caused by high unemployment. In 1977, the National Front candidate in West Bromwich by-election won 16.2% of the vote. However, by the early 1980s, the National Front had fragmented into several parties, the biggest of which was the British National Party, which still exists to this day as the BNP. Quite a famous quote that was used during the two-tone movement was, "Rock and roll preached rebellion against your parents. Punk spat anarchy and negativity, but simply by existing, two-tone demonstrated a togetherness and solidarity between black and white youth at a time where the far right was active on the streets." Another key point that I raise in my paper was the punky reggae party. Towards the end of 1976, punk was exploding all over the UK, and one club in particular, the Roxy, became the centre point of two genres, punk and reggae. The club was called the Roxy, as I said, and it was the first UK venue to exclusively offer punk. It opened in December 1976, and until 1978, Don Letts was the house DJ. Don Letts would play reggae singles between band sets. For lots of people, mostly white working class punks, this was their first real exposure to reggae. Why did these two come together? I believe it was through a common cause. And in the book that I read, there was a famous, quite a good quote saying, "These angry white followers of punk found themselves in common cause with their black brethren, who were fighting back against the uniforms of brutality, who were systematically using medieval stop and search laws to harass, bully, and oppress them." But what was the punky reggae party? Well, it was primarily through Bob Marley that it was really identified. Bob Marley, who was obviously a very prominent figure in the industry at this time, released the song, and there was quite a lot of lyrics that kind of embraced the relation between punk and reggae. There were lyrics saying, "I'm saying the Wailers will be here, the Damned, the Jam, and the Clash," all of which were punk rock bands at the time, and that the Maytals will be there too, who were a reggae band. Bob Marley realised that the two genres were not that different, and that they were both fighting for a similar cause, as during the song he sings, "Rejected by society, mistreated with impunity, protected by my dignity." The punk reggae fusion had a massive impact on the British bands of the 1980s. Notably, acts like the Rolling Stones, Graham Parker, Elvis Costello, The Clash, The Ruts, and The Police all got infused in the fusion of the genres. Here's quite a famous one. It was by the Rolling Stones, "Cherry O Baby."
Oh, cherry, oh, baby. Why in need of thee? If you don't believe it, so what have you left me to do?
But what effect did this have on the UK? David Hines, who was the lead singer of Steel Pulse, said that being associated with the punks was almost like black acts being related to by white people, and that became the catalyst for people getting involved with Rock Against Racism. There were so many problems in Britain at the time, with anti-immigrant graffiti regularly decorated the walls of housing estates, along with pub entrances displaying signs saying "No Irish, no blacks, no dogs." This seemed to typify a widespread acceptance of racist ideology in the UK. Rock Against Racism is one of the biggest parts in my paper. As I've stated in the paper, the year was 1976 and music was particularly political at this point in time, and the events of one performance of Eric Clapton at a gig in Birmingham sparked a political movement which would change the face of the UK. In a book by Daniel Rachel, "Walls Come Tumbling Down," he paraphrases a review of the performance. He shambled on stage and began warning us all about foreigners and the need to vote for Enoch Powell, whom Eric described as a prophet, and the danger of the country becoming a colony within 10 years was a real threat, apparently. Clapton later tried to downplay his words, saying that they weren't aimed at any particular minority group, but were an answer to what he saw as the takeover of London by wealthy Arabs. However, the dam was already done at this point, and Rock Against Racism was launched. Rock Against Racism was a group of artists, writers and musicians. Among them was the photographer Red Saunders, who had already been thinking about a cultural response against racism and the grasp of the far-right political movement National Front. The reply to the quote that I stated earlier began a movement that in the years that followed would play a critical role in transforming the lives of a generation of young people. However, there was a problem. Bands such as Madness and Bad Manners that came under the two-tone label had a following of organised fascist groups. The founders of Rock Against Racism realised this, and the culture clash didn't help with their ethos. In turn, the movement tried to draw away the white youth from the racist by showing that the music they listened to had black roots. Again, to combat the problem, Rock Against Racism was formed over a 5-year period. They staged carnivals and over 500 gigs throughout Britain. Then, after these events, the movement decided they wanted to become a more serious activist group. At the same time, the Anti-Nazi League was found, and together they organised one of the biggest benefit concerts in history. It was on the 30th of April 1978 in Victoria Park, London. Organisers were expecting around 20,000 people might attend the event. When about half that number had gathered in Trafalgar Square, they got ready to march to walk over 4 miles together to East London's Victoria Park for the concert. In the end, it has been said that around 100,000 people poured into the park for a bill including The Clash, Tom Robinson, Steel Pulse, X-Ray Speirs and Sham 69. The success of the concert led to more gigs and increased more awareness of the cause, and helped made ordinary people feel that they could make a difference in the problem. The movement still exists to this day in the form of love music, hate racism, and one cultural commentator, Stuart Hall, described the movement as one of the timeliest and best constructed of cultural interventions, repaying serious and extended analysis into a problem. Another movement with music was Red Wedge, who were a group of musicians who came together in order to get rid of Margaret Thatcher in the 1987 general election. The movement began in 1985 and they were associated with the Labour Party. They organised gigs and public meetings. Some famous artists got involved with the movement, such as Madness, The Smiths, The Style Council, Billy Bragg, The Communards, and Jerry Dammers, who was also involved in Rock Against Racism. In an interview, Billy Bragg explained the collective. Red Wedge gave us something to believe in and take forward. We were showing the country that still had commitment to a compassionate society. In the end, the general election was held on the 11th of June 1987, and this was when we found out if Red Wedge had defeated the Conservative government. Here are the results. The Conservatives won 376 seats, Labour 229. In total, 13.76 million votes were casted, and the Conservatives won 42.2% of the vote, which was a majority of 102 seats. Although Red Wedge were unsuccessful in the 1987 general election, there had been a 7% swing to Labour by 18 to 24-year-olds, so the movement had made a difference, I feel. and after the 1987 produced a third consecutive Conservative victory, many of the musical collective drifted away. A few further gigs were arranged and the group's magazine, Well Read, continued, but funding eventually ran out and Red Wedge was formally disbanded in 1990. So, in conclusion to my presentation, ska, reggae and two-tone without doubt changed the face of the UK. The Windrush generation were responsible for bringing the genre to the UK and has influenced not only the genres I've mentioned, but also many others. The impact of reggae on Jamaica is astonishing. For music to stop an escalating tension in a country which was divided at the time is astounding. I feel reggae had a message of openness, however, it was rebellious, and for it to then develop into two-tone, which also had a feeling of togetherness and it brought solidarity between white and white young people. I also think that is amazing how I also think that it is amazing how one record label can be responsible for the eruption of a ska revival, bringing bands such as Madness to the masses. Although Red Wedge were unsuccessful in the general election, I do feel that it changed the way young people thought, but not only young people, but as a country together. Here are my references.